Luna's paws crunch against the frostbitten ground, her breath rising in soft clouds as she weaved between towering pines. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the snow-dusted landscape, painting the Alaskan wilderness in hues of gold and deep blue. She was a dog built for this terrain, her thick Siberian husky coat insulating her from the cold, her sharp instincts guiding her through the labyrinth of trees. She hadn't meant to wander this far from the cabin, but something had drawn her. An unfamiliar scent carried on the wind, mingled with the damp musk of pine needles and frozen earth. Then she heard it, a sound so faint, so fragile, that she almost missed it. A whimper. Luna's ears perked. Her icy blue eyes narrowed as she turned toward the sound. It wasn't the cry of a wolf pup, nor the yipping of a fox kit. This was something different, something struggling, something afraid. She moved cautiously, her body low to ground, as she followed the noise through the underbrush. The scent grew stronger, raw and desperate. A few more steps, and then she saw them. 2 tiny bundles of her huddled beneath the twisted roots of a fallen tree, their fragile bodies curled against the cold. Bear cubs. Luna froze. Instinct screamed at her to back away. These cubs had a mother, and if she was anywhere nearby, she would not take kindly to an intruder. A mother bear would defend her young with deadly force. But something was wrong. The air carried no scent of an adult bear, no presence of the massive creature that should have been guarding them. She took a cautious step forward, sniffing the air. The cubs barely moved. One let out another weak whimper, its tiny paws twitching against the frozen ground. The other was unnervingly still. Their fur was matted with dirt, their ribs faintly visible beneath their thick coats. They were starving. Luna whined softly. She had been a mother once. Only weeks ago, she had nursed her own litter of puppies, their tiny bodies pressed against her warmth. The memory stirred something deep inside her, a primal instinct, an unshakable force. Slowly, she lowered herself onto the cold earth, curling her body around the cubs. They flinched at first, but then, as if sensing her warmth, they nestled against her. She licked their fur, nudging them gently, trying to coax life back into them. The minutes stretched into an hour. The sun dipped lower and the temperature fell. Luna knew she couldn't stay here forever, but she also couldn't leave them. They wouldn't last a night on their own. Then, a new sound broke through the silence. Footsteps. Luna's head snapped up, her body tense. A tall figure emerged from the trees. Jake, her owner. His rifle was slung across his back, his rugged face etched with concern. "Luna?" he called, his voice breathless. He had been searching for her. When his eyes landed on the scene before him, he stopped dead in his tracks. "Are those bear cubs?" Luna didn't move. She only looked up at him, her icy blue eyes holding something beyond instinct, beyond reason. A choice had been made, and Jake knew he had no choice but to make one too. Jake took a cautious step closer, his boots crunching over frozen pine needles. His breath hung in the air as he tried to process what he was seeing. His loyal husky, Luna, was curled around 2 bear cubs, her thick coat shielding their frail bodies from the cold. It was unnatural, impossible. Yet, there she was. "Luna," he said, softer this time, as if afraid his voice might shatter the delicate moment. Luna lifted her head, her blue eyes locking onto his. There was something in her gaze, something raw, something unshakable. She wasn't just protecting these cubs. She had claimed them. Jake hesitated. Everything he knew about the wild screamed at him to back away. This was a dangerous situation. A mother bear could return at any moment. And even with his rifle, he wouldn't stand a chance against an enraged grizzly. But the cubs, they were too weak. One of them barely stirred, its breathing shallow. The other whimpered softly, pressing its tiny muzzle into Luna's fur. Jake knelt beside them, exhaling a slow breath. He reached out carefully, brushing his fingertips over the nearest cub. Its fur was cold, its body trembling. "They're starving," he murmured. Luna let out a low whine, nudging the cub with her nose. Jake glanced around, scanning the dense forest. If their mother was nearby, she would have heard their cries. But there was nothing, no tracks in the snow, no distant growl of warning. The cubs were alone. His gut twisted. Had their mother abandoned them? Was she dead? He'd heard of mother bears being killed by poachers or falling victim to the brutal law of the wild. But cubs this young, they didn't survive on their own. Jake exhaled. He knew what had to be done, but it wasn't going to be easy. "All right, girl," he said, reaching for his coat. "We can't leave them out here." He carefully scooped the first cub into his arms. It barely reacted, too weak to resist. The second cub let out a feeble cry as he reached for it, but Luna nuzzled it reassuringly, and it settled. Jake wrapped them in his thick flannel jacket, securing them against his chest. They were so light, too light. Luna stood, shaking snow from her fur, then pressed close to his side, her nose brushing the bundle in his arms. She wasn't going to let them out of her sight. "Let's get them home," Jake murmured, with Luna trotting faithfully beside him. He turned back toward the cabin, his mind racing. Taking in 2 orphan bear cubs was insane. They were wild animals. The odds of survival were slim. And even if they did survive, then what? He couldn't keep them. He had no experience raising bears. But none of that mattered now, because in this moment, in the bitter cold of the fading daylight, survival was the only thing that mattered. And right now, their best chance was with him. The journey back to the cabin felt longer than it should have. The weight in Jake's arms wasn't much. 2 frail bear cubs wrapped tightly in his flannel jacket, but the weight on his mind was something else entirely. This wasn't just a walk through the woods anymore. This was a gamble. Luna padded beside him, her thick fur bristling against his leg. She moved with purpose, glancing up at him now and then, as if to check that he was still carrying the cubs. She had already made her choice. Jake wasn't sure if he had. The trees thinned as they neared the clearing where his cabin stood, a humble structure built for solitude. Smoke still curled from the chimney. He had left a fire burning when he'd gone out to search for Luna. Inside, warmth embraced them. The scent of burning would fill the air, chasing away the bitter cold that clung to his skin. He moved quickly, kneeling by the stone hearth. Luna sat beside him, ears perked, watching as he unwrapped the cubs. They barely moved. Jake swore under his breath. He had seen his share of animals in bad shape before, but this was different. They were so small, their fur matted with dirt and ice. Their tiny paws twitched, their bodies trembling with exhaustion. He grabbed an old towel from a nearby chair and wrapped around them, rubbing gently to stir some warmth into their fragile bodies. "What the hell am I doing?" he muttered. Luna let out a low whine, her gaze fixed on the cubs. She nudged one gently with her nose, licking its head with slow, deliberate strokes. Jake sighed. "Yeah, I know. You want to help." His mind raced. He needed to get them something to eat. But what? He had milk, but bear cubs weren't puppies. He had no idea if they'd even take it. He stood abruptly, moving to the kitchen. A half-full jug of milk sat in the fridge, but it was cold. Too cold for creatures as fragile. He poured some into a small pot and set it on the stove to warm. Luna hadn't moved from the cubs. She curled around them again, pressing close. They responded, just barely, their tiny bodies leaning into her warmth. Jake ran a hand through his hair. This was insane. He should have left them. Should have let nature take its course. But when he looked at Luna, at the way she had taken these cubs as her own, he knew there was no going back. With a sigh, he poured the warm milk into a shallow dish. He grabbed a clean rag, dipping in the liquid. If the cubs were too weak to drink, maybe they'd suckle from the cloth. He knelt again, lifting the smallest cub gently. It was barely conscious. He pressed the damp rag to its mouth, letting a few drops of warm milk touch its lips. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, weakly, the cub's tiny tongue flicked out. It was feeble, barely enough to count as drinking, but it was something. "That's it," Jake murmured. "Come on, little guy." He glanced at Luna. She was watching him, her blue eyes filled with something he could only describe as quiet determination. She wasn't going to give up on them. And he realized neither was he. Jake woke to the sound of wind rattling the cabin's wooden walls, the howl of the storm pressing against the roof like a living thing. Snow piled against the windows, casting the room in a dim, muted light. The fire in the hearth had burned low, filling the space with soft, fading warmth. He sat up with a start, his first thought on the cubs. Luna hadn't moved from her spot near the fire. She lay curled around them, her thick fur their only shield against the night's cold. Even as Jake approached, she barely lifted her head, only flicking her ear in acknowledgement. The cubs were still alive. That was the first relief. But they weren't out of danger yet. Jake knelt beside them, reaching out to gently touch the smaller one. Its tiny body was warmer now, no longer trembling as violently as before. But they were still weak, still too fragile. He sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. What the hell was he doing? Raising bear cubs wasn't exactly in his skill set. He could survive out here in the Alaskan wild. Hunt, fish, build shelter, live off the land, but this was something else entirely. Luna licked the cub's head, nudging it gently. The little creature barely stirred. They're going to need more than just a little warm milk, Jake muttered. His supplies weren't made for this. The cubs needed real nourishment, something to build their strength. They would normally be nursing from their mother, drinking the rich, fatty milk that only a bear could provide. Jake cursed under his breath and pushed himself to his feet. The nearest town was miles away, and with a storm raging outside, a trip to find better supplies was out of question. He'd have to make do with what he had. His mind raced as he moved to the kitchen, scanning his shelves. Oatmeal, eggs, a can of condensed milk. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. He worked quickly, mixing the ingredients into a thin, warm mash. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to keep the cubs going. When he returned to the fire, Luna was watching him, her blue eyes following his every move. She seemed to sense that he was trying to help, that he was just as invested in their survival as she was. Jake dipped his fingers into the mixture, bringing a small amount to the cub's mouth. At first, nothing. No response. His stomach tightened. "Come on, little guy," he murmured. "You gotta fight." Then, after what felt like forever, the cub's tiny tongue flicked out, tasting the mixture. A few seconds later, it took a weak but unmistakable lick. Jake let out a slow breath. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Luna let out a soft, approving whine as if she understood what had just happened. He moved the second cub, repeating the process. This one was a little stronger, lapping at the food with more effort. Jake sat back on his heels, watching them. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. But this was just the beginning. They were still fragile. The wild was still waiting for them. And Jake knew that no matter how much he and Luna cared for them, they weren't meant to stay. They were meant for something bigger. Luna curled around the cubs once more, her body still protecting them from the cold, her instincts as sharp as ever. Jake leaned back against the hearth, staring into the fire. Against the odds, they had made it through the night. But what came next? For the first time in years, he wasn't sure. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside blanketed in a thick layer of untouched snow. The forest was quiet, the kind of quiet that came after a heavy snowfall. Still, peaceful, yet hiding an undercurrent of wild unpredictability. Inside the cabin, life had stirred. Jake watched as the cubs, stronger than they had been days ago, clumsily climbed over Luna's side, their tiny paws pressing into her thick fur. She laid patiently, letting them nuzzle and paw at her, occasionally licking their heads with slow, motherly care. They had survived. But now, another question loomed in Jake's mind, one he had been avoiding. What now? He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling a slow breath. Keeping the cubs had never been the plan. It was never even supposed to be an option. But now, as he watched Luna with them, the thought of sending them away left a strange weight in his chest. Still, he knew the truth. The cubs weren't pets. They weren't meant to stay here. No matter how much Luna had cared for them, no matter how much Jake himself had come to care for them, they belonged in the wild, and they couldn't survive on their own. Not yet. Jake stood and walked to the window, his gaze fixed on the snow-covered trees. There was only one option left. He grabbed his old satellite phone from the counter and powered it on. The signal was weak, but after a few moments, he got through. "This is Jake Bennett," he said. "I've got a situation up at my cabin. 2 orphan bear cubs." The woman on the other end was quiet for a moment before responding. "Are they alive?" "Yeah, barely, but they're getting stronger." Another pause. Then, we can send someone up. They'll need to be rehabilitated before they can be released. Jake swallowed hard. This was the right call. He knew it, but that didn't make it any easier. He glanced back at Luna. She was still curled protectively around the cubs, their small bodies tucked against her warmth. They've got a mother, he found himself saying. Not their real one, but she's been taking care of them. The woman on the line hesitated. That's rare, but it won't last forever. They need proper care, proper training. If they're going to survive in the wild, they need to be raised the right way. Jake closed his eyes briefly. He knew she was right. How soon can you get here? We'll send a team tomorrow. He ended the call and set the phone down, staring at the wooden floor. Tomorrow. Luna lifted her head, sensing something in the air. She looked at him, her blue eyes calm but questioning. Jake knelt beside her, rubbing her ears. They can't stay, girl, he murmured. You did good. You saved them. But it's time to let them go. Luna didn't react. She simply turned back to the cubs, giving one last slow lick to the smaller one's head. Jake felt a pang in his chest. Tomorrow they'd be gone. And for the first time since finding them, he wasn't sure he was ready. Adjustments. Morning came too soon. Jake stood outside the cabin, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The sky was a pale, icy blue, the kind of color that only showed up on the coldest mornings. In the distance, the low hum of an approaching vehicle broke the silence of the forest. Luna sat beside him, her fur bristling slightly in the cold, but her focus wasn't on the sound of the vehicle. It was on the two small cubs curled up near the door. They were stronger now, not by much, but enough that Jake knew they had a chance. The rescue team arrived in an unmarked truck, tires crunching over packed snow as it rolled to a stop. Two people stepped out, one man, one woman, both wearing thick winter coats and carrying the air of professionals who had done this before. Jake Bennett? The woman asked, approaching with careful steps. Jake nodded. Yeah, you the wildlife team. She gave a tight smile. Alaska Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. We'll take it from here. The man with her crouched near the cubs, carefully assessing them. They're in rough shape, but you did good. Most wouldn't have survived this long without their mother. Jake swallowed hard. He had known this was coming, but that didn't make it easier. The cubs whimpered as they were lifted into soft, padded carriers, one letting out a tiny, confused cry as it was separated from Luna. She stood immediately, stepping forward, ears pinned back. It's okay, girl, Jake murmured, placing a steadying hand on her back. Luna let out a low whine, her blue eyes locked on the cubs. For the first time since she had found them, she wasn't protecting them. She was losing them. Jake felt the same way. Where will they go? He asked. The woman zipped up the carrier and stood. We'll rehabilitate them. Teach them the survival skills they would have learned from their mother. If they pass the program, we'll release them back into the wild when they're ready. Jake exhaled. It was the best chance they had. But damn, it was hard. The team loaded the cubs into the truck, closing the doors with a dull thunk. Luna sat beside Jake, unmoving, watching as the vehicle backed up and disappeared down the snowy path. And then they were gone. The silence that followed was heavy. Luna lowered her head, staring at the ground where the cubs had been. Jake felt it too, that deep, quiet ache of something that had mattered and now was missing. Come on, girl, he said softly, giving her one last pat before stepping back inside. But Luna didn't move. Jake turned, watching her. She stayed there, still as a statue, her gaze locked on the road long after the truck had disappeared, waiting. For days after, Luna seemed different. She still followed Jake on his morning walks, still curled by the fire at night, but something in her had changed. She would pause near the cabin door, ears flicking toward the woods, as if listening for something. And then, months later, on an early summer morning, she found it. Jake was stacking firewood when he heard Luna bark, a sharp, excited sound. He turned just in time to see her standing at the tree line, tail wagging, body tense with anticipation. And then he saw them. Two young bears, no longer cubs but not quite adults, standing a short distance away. Their coats were thick, their bodies stronger, healthier. They had survived. Jake's breath caught in his chest. Luna didn't move. She simply stood, watching them, and for a long moment, they watched her back. Then, as if understanding that this was only a moment, not a return, not a reunion, just a quiet acknowledgement, the bears turned and disappeared into the trees. Luna sat down, her tail curling around her paws, her blue eyes calm. Jake exhaled. She had done her job, and now, finally, she knew they were where they belonged. So, did he?